Wake up call for everyone that's been drinking the Chinese government Kool-Aid. On the world stage, China is losing, and I mean big time. Sometimes I need to remind myself that all this propaganda isn't actually true and that China's doing pretty bad. In country-to-country terms, success is not only measured by how things are at home, but by how many partners and allies and ties that you've forged. And in this case, it really is about the friends that you've made along the way. I'm gonna let you know how China's doing on a global scale, and just to make it easier for the Chinese government to understand, because I know that they're watching, judging by the insane amount of bot account comments on my last video that left me comments saying that I've never been to China before, so that people shouldn't listen to my video. Lived in China for 10 years, bro. Anyway, the way that I'm gonna judge China on a global scale today is gonna be based on a child's report card scale, so that they and you guys can understand very clearly. Guys, I'm super close to 1 million subscribers. In fact, it might already have happened by the time this comes out, but if it didn't, have a look down there and make sure you're subscribed. I'd really appreciate getting that gold play button. This video is brought to you by Incogni. You ever heard of a data broker? Well, it's as bad, if not worse, than what it sounds like, because these people go out there, take your information, and then sell it on the black market, creating junk mail, identity theft vulnerabilities, and so much more, all just for you. So why do these data brokers do it? Well, there's money involved. They get tons of money for selling your information, like your name, your email, your address, your gender, your phone number, your education, your IP information, your relatives, alias, social security number, your employment history, your shopping habits. Thousands of companies are collecting and aggregating and then trading your personal data without you knowing anything about it. And that's why I love Incogni. Incogni is a company that goes out there and requests that data brokers delete that information that they have about you, and then in turn, your privacy is protected. The bad news is that if you were to go do that by yourself and go contact all these data brokers, it would take you forever to do that. But Incogni does all that messy work for you. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Go to incogni.com/cmilk and use the code CMILK to get 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Take your personal data off the market today. Go to incogni.com/cmilk and use the code CMILK for 60% off an annual plan. Thanks. So, how is China doing on the US front? If there's one thing that China has shown us recently, it's that it doesn't have peaceful ambitions and cooperation and collaboration with other countries, and definitely not with the US. In fact, US Ambassador Burns, who lives in China, said, "I've been concerned for my 2+ years here about the very aggressive Chinese government efforts to denigrate America, to tell a distorted story about American society, American history, and American policy." He said it happens every day on all the networks available to the government here, and there's a high degree of anti-Americanism online. China's been running the biggest influence operation I've ever seen against American society and Americans in general. Potentially you watching if you're American. Through fake AI news, through social media networks, through social media short form platforms you might be familiar with, through predatory practices like cheap companies and loopholes, and so much more. Anyway, they've failed to be diplomatic with the USA. They've stolen trillions in intellectual property. They've been telling their citizens that the USA is the demon enemy of the world, and they're even teaching their children through curriculum that the USA is their mortal enemy. Pair that with China trying to buy up all the US farmland. By the way, Americans can't own anything in China. Harassing Chinese dissidents and Chinese government critics in the US, and bam, you've failed diplomatically. No wonder Americans are getting stabbed in China. I give China's diplomacy report card with the USA an F. However, spending billions of dollars on tearing apart American society through influence operation and information warfare isn't the only thing that China's focused on. How's China been doing in Central Asia? This is an overlooked region, I'll tell you why. China's really been trying to do their best to get into Central Asia. You know, all those Stan countries, as well as Turkey and the like? Well, China's been trying to restart the old Silk Road and establish footholds in all of them. China is going straight up neo-colonialist with these insane ambitions of buying its way across Central Asia, but China's got a big problem. They all speak similar languages. Why is this an issue? Well, it turns out that language and similar cultures often bring nations and societies together, and that's what leads us to the Organization of Turkic States. By the way, guess who else speaks a Turkic language? The Uyghurs. You know, the entire people group that China's been genociding in Western China? Who do you think they're gonna side with if they get safe haven across the border in some of these Turkic-speaking countries where they already fit in? So, you have an organization of countries that can share a culture with very similar languages, and one upper middle income country to lead it all, which is Turkey, with lots of well-educated citizens, lots of superb engineers, so people will want to invest money and knowledge into those countries. This area is very likely to grow in importance and really provides a strong counterweight to Russian and Chinese attempts at influencing those countries. Turkey has been developing a 5th generation fighter jet and has sold military drones that performed very successfully in Azerbaijan. But just beyond weapons, there's also new shipments of oil and gas as well as pipelines being developed. It's pretty much everything that you need to become a superpower. I don't know how Russia or China can hope to compete with that. And while they might be on par with China in the GDP per capita area, I don't see Turkey stagnating like China is when there's so much potential there. If you ask me, I feel like Turkey won here, not China, despite all their efforts and so much that China's invested in this region. Unfortunately, I don't think is gonna pan out in the long term. I give China's influence in Central Asia a C. So in terms of alliances, by the way, of course you have things like NATO and you have the G7, right? You also have the Quad, which is the US, Japan, Australia, and India. And you also have the Quad Plus, which is not really official, but sometimes it includes Korea and Vietnam and Singapore, Philippines, maybe Taiwan. Potentially the Organization of Turkic States, which I just mentioned. China has no peers in this sphere. These are alliances that are so much more powerful than anything China's been able to drum up. Now, what about China's influence/relationship with Russia? This one's really interesting. China and Russia appear to be best buds at the moment. For all intents and purposes, China is supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine, while pretending that it's not doing that. The real thing to look at, though, is not how they're acting together now, all chummy and buddy. It's actually to look at how they're probably gonna act when Russia heads into potential collapse. The sanctions on Russia are absolutely devastating, and the propaganda and deflection effort to make you think that everything's fine and dandy is very telling. Did you know that you can buy bread and you can actually put coins in shopping carts in Russia? If you know, you know. Anyway, if Russia collapses, China could end up trying to grab the Russian Far East, where they've already put Chinese names on the map for old outer Manchurian cities. A lot of ugliness could emerge out of this relationship, and it isn't even clear if China would be able to afford to do very much in the Far East, except to maybe have some sort of port that wouldn't be blockaded by Taiwan, Japan, or the Philippines, which is definitely something they would want. However, if Russia falls apart, I think the real temptation for China will be to grab the Far East of Russia to get back outer Manchuria, plus lots and lots of resource-rich land. I say that the clock is ticking on China and Russia's partnership if Russia goes down the tubes. I give it a B- for the time being. Let's go to Southeast Asia. Some of China's man-made islands are now sinking, and they're suffering from tofu drag construction, which you may have heard of. It's very poor quality stuff. Anyway, they are hugely pissing off the Philippines and Indonesia right now, and they're pushing Philippines in firmly into the pro-US camp, something I did not expect to happen. This could result in some small but tense skirmishes. We might end up seeing some physical intervention by the US Navy, escorting Philippines ships to the Scarborough Shoal over the next year. Anyway, check out this National Review article about how absolutely insanely dangerous the Chinese military is getting in regards to the Philippines right now, and how it actually might drag in the US into serious conflict. Anyway, I expect a rise in military exercises between various couplings of members in this region, sort of like the Quad Plus thing I was mentioning. Anyway, China's influence in Southeast Asia is palpable, especially in the straight up vassal states that it's created, like Cambodia and Laos. I'm sorry, by the way, if you're from Cambodia or Laos, if you're watching this video, I'm sorry to the people in those countries, but you don't live in an independent country anymore. You live in China. Anyway, China's influence long-term does not look super healthy in the rest of the region. I give it a D. So what about China's success in South America? I actually don't think they'll get much traction there. The economies in South America are still largely engaged with the US, and that just works for them. It's kept them going, it's kept the US happy. Also, Argentina, under that dude Milei, he has a firm anti-China stance, and he's told BRICS, this big organization that China's trying to start to like get the US out of the world global sphere and influence. He told them that they weren't interested in membership, and that looks to be holding true. Chile also won't likely want to play down market with China, and Colombia has a long history of cooperating with the US, and coming out of their civil war, they are poised for massive growth. They also might bring Ecuador and Peru into their fold. It looks like Ecuador is now making Chinese people apply for visas when they want to go there. They got rid of their visa-free policy, so it looks like Ecuador might be falling into the Western fold as well. Uruguay, they don't even need China. The only place I could see China gaining and keeping influence is maybe in Brazil, Venezuela, and Cuba, and maybe El Salvador if the leader there becomes a dictator towards non-criminals. I give China's influence in South and Central America a C-. Now, Africa is a different story. China has worked to cultivate a lot of relationships with corrupt African leaders. And I really hope we don't see African states step backwards and go back down that road of corruption and fealty towards China like what they did with Russia. However, I would not be shocked if China started making some vassal states in Central Africa. But is this idea of China controlling a lot of Africa serious? Well, it is for Africans. A lot of famines in Africa from the 1980s and 1990s were actually driven by poor governance and corruption coupled with socialist policies. Many of those countries escaped that misery, but China's effect could drag them back to the bad old days. Worse, however, is how Chinese firms treat African workers. If you've seen the videos, you'll know what I mean. They're bad. I give China's benefits in Africa for China a B, and I give China's impact on Africa for Africans a D-. They've been real mean over there, and for some reason, most people are not talking about how China's been treating the Africans. So, where does that leave China? Well, not in the best of places. Many of the minerals that China's globally scrambling to secure are also being found in developing countries now, so they won't be able to dominate those markets for long. Furthermore, those minerals aren't much good if they can't produce top value add semiconductors and technology. And I doubt the current restrictions on technology will get loosened. If anything, China might also actually get sanctioned. So China starts to look a lot like the Soviet Union did before it collapsed. Maybe they assemble some vassal states, maybe they're able to separate from the rest of the world for some of their basic needs, but they'll still be begging for help to meet basic food needs, because remember, China imports most of its food. China will be much less able to capitalize on their resources, and they will be stuck in a middle income trap. They will also end up spending a ton on the military, but they won't have the growth to easily pay for it. And we know where that led the Soviet Union. So a desperate, struggling superpower that didn't quite make it. It's basically what China is. Countries like that tend to make rash military decisions, like, you might be asking, when are they gonna invade Taiwan? But in all reality, I think most military-minded people in China would see that invading Taiwan would be absolute insanity right now. The Ukraine war plus the effects of sanctions have made that very clear. However, the way China works is dangerous. No one will give the bad news to the guys in charge, and therefore they make less informed decisions. This can lead to dumb stuff happening. And that's not even considering how much of their military might actually just be complete trash, like ineffective garbage. Remember those missiles that they found full of water instead of fuel? So for potential conflict, where does that put us time-wise? Maybe 2.5 years out, China will try to invade or skirmish with Taiwan. If they actually try anything more than skirmishing, it's likely to blow up in their face, like real bad. Or maybe there's an invasion and the military just takes over the entire country. China's probably going to start meddling more in Central Asia, more than they ever have, to try to really get their foothold there. I suspect that they'll try to push Russia around a little bit more, maybe even skirmish on the Far East border to grab some of that land. In many of these scenarios, and maybe even just for supporting Russia in the Ukraine invasion, China might end up under sanctions. They know this, and that's why they've stockpiled so much stuff. However, Russia did this too, and it didn't help them out very much. The real takeaway is the important part. Did you notice something that was not part of my analysis? That's China's engagement with the Western world, or developed countries like the US or the countries in the EU. It seems that the US has already found and made plans, so that China is really just left with scraps. I mean, Mexico has already replaced China as the USA's biggest trade partner. In fact, it's so bad that China's been trying to set up companies in Mexico to mitigate this, but all that's really been doing is driving up wages and getting more help and labor to Mexico and helping Mexicans. It's not hurting the US. China will most likely stop growing. It will stay not rich. It will scare away more investors and Western firms, and it will butt heads more with Russia. It will end up increasingly isolated and bitter, and there's not much they can do about it. India, Vietnam, Mexico, Colombia, Thailand, the Philippines will probably take over much of China's business that they just lost. Maybe in 10 to 15 years, businesses will come back and consider investing if the leadership looks hopeful, but here's what an expert said. China's most likely in for a lot of eating bitter, except with nothing to gain from it. I suspect in 5 years, most people will care a lot less about China. China will kind of be like North Korea, blustering to get headlines, but not taken very seriously. So if the Chinese government overall, globally, were to get a report card, on the report card it would say, "You're not failing yet, but please see me after class." And then they'd get a very stern talking to about how they need to improve before they throw their future away if they don't change now. If you guys like this video, you're probably gonna love my show, The China Show, every Friday, where we talk about everything that's happening in China, the good, the bad, the ugly, the awesome, the viral, the crazy, the bad, all that stuff. You're definitely gonna wanna make sure you're there if you wanna see everything that's happening in China up to date every single Friday. Thank you very much, and I'll catch you on the next one.